A split second can change everything when you are in the line of duty. We strip away the cinematic filters and pre-written scripts to present you with the unyielding, objective reality of the field.
All right, what you doing out here? And what's in the bag?
I'm just sitting, waiting for someone.
What's in the bag?
My property.
Funny how it's always the same profile sitting this close to a bank with a bag.
Don't play dumb. People like you don't sit outside banks like this unless they're planning something.
Like me? I'm not planning.
The body cam footage doesn't begin with shouting. It begins with stillness. Midday sunlight bouncing off glass towers in the financial district. Traffic moving in steady waves. Pedestrians crossing at the light. The front doors of a large federal bank sliding open and closed every few seconds. Business as usual. Across from the bank entrance sits a metal public bench bolted into the sidewalk. And on that bench, a black man in his early 40s. Alone. Composed. Dark tailored jacket. Neutral slacks. Polished shoes. A leather messenger bag resting upright against his leg. Not hidden. Not clutched. Just placed neatly beside him. He checks his watch once. Looks at his phone. Types something briefly. Then goes still again. From a distance, nothing about him stands out. From inside a patrol car slowly rolling past, everything does. The body cam activates as the cruiser eases to the curb. Zoom stabilizes slightly. Focus locks onto the bench, the bag, the bank doors. The officer exhales once. Long. Suspicious. The cruiser stops. Engine hum fades. Door opens. Boots hit pavement. The body cam sways with purposeful strides across the sidewalk. No greeting. No introduction. The officer stops directly in front of the bench. What's in the bag? No hello. No context. Just accusation wrapped in a question. The man looks up slowly. Calm eyes. Excuse me? The bag? The officer repeats. What's in it? Personal belongings. That's vague. It's accurate. The officer shifts his stance, hand resting near his belt. You've been sitting here long? About 15 minutes. Waiting for what? A meeting. With who? That's private. The officer glances toward the bank entrance, then back to the bag. Funny how it's always your type sitting this close to a bank with a bag. There it is. Not implied. Not subtle. Said plainly. The man tilts his head slightly. My type? You heard me. A few pedestrians slow their pace. Just enough to sense tension. Before we go any further, comment where you're watching from. Let's see how far this documentary travels. The man remains seated. This is a public bench. Across from a bank. Yes. With a bag? Yes. That's not coincidence. The man's tone stays even. What exactly are you suggesting? The officer leans closer. That you're casing the place? A pause. I'm not. Then why here? Because it's public. Banks get robbed, the officer spies, and it's usually someone who doesn't belong hanging around first. Doesn't belong? The officer gestures vaguely. You know what I mean. No, the man replies. Explain it. The officer's jaw tightens. You people always act confused. I'm not confused. I'm asking you to clarify. Stand up. For what purpose? Stand. Up. The man rises slowly, hands visible. The bag remains on the bench. Several people now openly watching. The officer circles slightly. You got ID? Yes. Let me see it. Am I being detained? You're being investigated. For sitting? For suspicious behavior. What behavior? Loitering to near a financial institution. That's not illegal. It can be when intent is involved. And what intent have you observed? The officer points at the bag. What's in it? A gun, gloves, mask? No? Then open it. No. That wasn't a request. It requires probable cause. The officer steps closer. It can't be a coincidence someone like you is parked outside a bank with a bag. The air tightens. Pedestrians stop walking. Phones subtly rise. The man keeps steady eye contact. And it can't be coincidence you approach me based on how I look. You're making this not about race. You already did. The officer's voice sharpens. You fit a pattern. What pattern? Single male, bag, close to a bank, watching. I've checked my phone twice. You've been scanning. For what? Opportunity. The man exhales slowly. I'm not planning to rob a bank. That's what they all say. The officer gestures toward the entrance again. Your kind thinks blending in makes you invisible. My kind? Don't twist my words. I'm quoting them. The officer's posture stiffens as he notices the gathering attention. You think this is a joke? No. You think I'm stupid? No. Then open the bag. No. The officer's tone drops lower. You want to make this difficult? I'm exercising my rights. You people always hide behind that. And you hide behind suspicion. A woman whispers nearby. He's just sitting there. The officer hears it, peels the eyes, and doubles down. You're too calm. That's not a crime. It is when you're planning something. I'm not. Then prove it. By surrendering my property without cause? Yes. No. The officer reaches toward the bag. The man steps slightly to block access. Don't touch it. Now you're interfering. With what? My investigation. What crime? Attempted bank robbery. There has been no attempt. Yet. The word lands heavy. The officer points toward the doors. I've seen this before. Someone like you sits close, watches traffic, times the exits. I'm waiting for someone. For who? That's not your concern. It is when you're this close to a bank. The man's voice remains steady. You approach me because of how I look. I approached you because you don't belong. On a public bench? In this spot. And who decides that? I do. Silence. Thick. The officer stares at the bag again, then at the man. This is your last chance, open it. No? Turn around. For what lawful reason? For resisting. I haven't resisted. You're refusing commands. I'm declining unlawful ones. The officer's breathing grows heavier. You people always think you're smarter than the system. And you always think suspicion equals guilt. The tension is no longer subtle. It's visible. Palpable. The bank doors slide open behind them again. Customers stepping out unaware of the storm forming 10 feet away. The officer steps closer. You're planning something. I'm not. You expect me to believe that? Yes. The officer shakes his head slowly. Someone like you who doesn't just sit outside a bank with a bag. The man holds his ground. And someone like you doesn't just accuse without evidence. The body cam captures every word, every assumption, every escalation. Because what the officer believes he's preventing isn't happening. And what he doesn't know is that the man he's profiling as a potential bank robber isn't casing the bank. He's conducting surveillance, just not the kind the officer imagines. And this confrontation is about to flip in a way that will make this sidewalk the center of something much bigger than a bag on a bench. The officer's hand hovers near the bag again, not touching it, but close enough to make the point. Turn around, he repeats. The man doesn't move. I'm not turning around without cause. There is cause. What is it? You're sitting outside a bank with a bag looking like you're about to do something. That's not cause. That's imagination. The officer's jaw tightens. You think this is imagination? You think I don't know how this works? How what works? You sit, you wait, you act calm, then you make a move. The man's expression stays level. You're narrating a crime that hasn't happened. The officer leans closer. Because I'm preventing it. From who? From you. Pedestrians slow even more now. A couple stands near the crosswalk pretending to check directions while clearly listening. The officer notices, and his tone sharpens further. You people always play innocent when you get caught early. Caught doing what? Planning. Planning what? A robbery. The word lands heavy. I'm not planning anything. That's what they all say. The officer points to the bank again. Financial district, midday. You think it's random? Yes. No, it's not. The man keeps his voice calm. You don't get to invent intent. I don't have to invent anything. I see it. What exactly do you see? A guy who doesn't fit this area, sitting too close, watching the doors. I checked my phone. You scanned the entrance. I blinked. The officer scoffs. You think you're clever? No, I think you're wrong. That hits something. You people always think you're smarter than the system. And you think the system gives you permission to assume. The officer steps even closer. Now they're only a foot apart. Open the bag. No. You refusing a lawful command? I'm refusing an unlawful one. The officer's hand moves to his radio briefly. You want backup? For sitting? For suspicious activity. What activity? Loitering with intent. Intent requires evidence. Intent requires instinct. That's not how the law works. The officer's eyes narrow. Don't lecture me about the law. Then don't ignore it. The tension thickens. A man across the street raises his phone higher now, clearly recording. The officer sees it. His posture stiffens. You recording? He snaps toward the bystander. The bystander shrugs. It's public. The officer looks back at the man on the bench. See, this is what your type does. Turns everything into a scene. I was sitting. You're escalating. You approached me. You match the description? What description? Male, alone, suspicious. That's not a description. It is when it fits. Fits what? Fits the pattern. Again. Pattern? The man exhales slowly. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. The officer points at the bag again. What's inside? Documents. For what? For work. What work? That's not your concern. It is if you're about to walk into that bank. I'm not walking into the bank. So why sit across from it? Because this bench exists. You're playing games. No, I'm answering your assumptions. The officer lowers his voice colder now. You know how many times we've seen guys like you sit near banks before something goes down? How many? Enough. And how many times were you wrong? The officer doesn't answer that. Instead, he gestures sharply. Hands where I can see them. They are. Higher. The man raises them slightly. Pedestrians fully stop now. Traffic light changes twice without people crossing. The scene is no longer subtle. It's a spectacle. You got a weapon? The officer asks. No? You sure? Yes. You expect me to take your word for it? Yes. The officer laughs dryly. Your kind always expects trust. And your kind never gives it. Silence. The officer's breathing grows heavier into the Bodycam mic. You know what I see? He says. What? A guy waiting for timing. For what timing? Security rotation, guard shift, crowd flow. You've built an entire crime in your head. I prevented crimes by thinking ahead, not by accusing random citizens. You're not random. Why? The officer hesitates a half a second. Then, because you don't belong here. The words are sharper this time. Clearer. Less coded. The man doesn't flinch. On a public sidewalk? In front of that bank. Ownership of space doesn't work like that. Today it does. The officer's hand brushes the bag. The man steps forward instantly. Don't touch my property. There it is. There what? Defensive. Protective. Same thing. The officer grabs the strap lightly. Let go. No. Let go. No. Now it's physical proximity. Not force. But tension. If there's nothing in here, prove it, the officer says. If there's nothing illegal about sitting, prove it, the man replies. Backup siren faintly echoes in the distance. The officer must have called it without announcing. The sound shifts the air. The stakes climb. Because this is no longer just a sidewalk conversation. Now it's an official scene. 2 patrol cars approach slowly from opposite ends of the block. Pedestrians scatter back slightly. The officer steps closer to the man's face. You had a chance. I still do. Not anymore. For what? For this to stay simple. The backup units park. 2 more officers step out. Hands near belts. Eyes scanning. What's going on? One asks. The first officer doesn't hesitate. Possible casing, suspicious male, refusing cooperation. The word refusing hangs in the air. The man looks at the new officers. I'm sitting on a public bench. With a bag, the first officer adds. The backup officer eyes the bag. Then the bank. Then the man. You planning something? He asks. No. The first officer cuts in. He's been watching the entrance. I've been waiting. For what? The second officer asks. A meeting. With who? That's confidential. The first officer shakes his head. See, that's what I've been saying. The pressure increases. 3 uniforms now. 1 man. 1 bag. And a crowd. Phones raised higher. Voices whispering. Is he robbing the bank? No, he's just sitting. You people always make it complicated, the first officer mutters. The man finally says quietly, You've already decided who I am. The first officer replies just as quietly, Yeah, I have. And that's the moment the misunderstanding stops being about suspicion and becomes about certainty. Because the officer isn't investigating anymore. He's confirming what he already believes. And he has no idea that the man he's trying to frame as a bank robber isn't waiting to commit a crime. He's waiting for someone else to make one. And it's unfolding faster than anyone on that sidewalk realizes. The first officer's words hang in the air. Yeah, I have. Not suspicion anymore. Conviction. 3 uniforms now form a loose half circle around the man. The crowd shifts back but doesn't leave. Phones are up openly now. The body cam catches fragments of whispers. He hasn't done anything. They're saying robbery? The second officer steps closer to the bag. You mind if we take a look? Yes, the man replies evenly. I mind. The first officer gestures sharply. See? Defensive. No, the man says. Consistent. The third officer studies him carefully. You got anything illegal in there? No. Then open it and clear this up. I'm not required to? The first officer's patience thins. You think this is a game? No? You think I'm profiling you? Yes. The word lands firm. Direct. The second officer shifts slightly. Based on what? Based on the fact that sitting on a public bench with a bag became attempted bank robbery the moment I existed in this space. The first officer scoffs. You existed suspiciously. That's not a crime. It is when you don't belong. There it is again. Belong. The third officer glances at the bank doors. Dispatch hasn't reported anything active, he says quietly. The first officer replies without looking at him. That's because I'm preventing it. The man studies each officer in turn. You called backup because I wouldn't surrender my property. You called attention to yourself, the first officer fires back. I was sitting. You were watching. I was waiting. For what? The second officer presses. For confirmation. Confirmation of what? The man pauses, just long enough to make them uncomfortable. That the right people are in place. The first officer narrows his eyes. Right people for what? For what's about to happen. The words shift the air instantly. The second officer stiffens. What's about to happen? The man doesn't break eye contact. That depends. Depends on what? The first officer demands. On whether this scene escalates further. The first officer steps closer again. Is that a threat? No? Then what is it? A statement. The third officer leans toward the first. This is getting weird. The man finally moves his hand slowly, well, not toward the bag, but toward his jacket pocket. All three officers tense immediately. Don't reach, the first officer snaps. The man stops mid-motion. I'm retrieving identification. You had a chance to show ID earlier. You didn't ask for this one. What does that mean? The second officer asks. The man holds still. You accused me of planning a robbery. Yes. You escalated to backup. Yes. You announced attempted bank robbery into your radio. Silence. The first officer's jaw tightens. You were casing a financial institution. No, the man says calmly. I was monitoring it. For what? The third officer asks. The man's eyes shift briefly past them. Across the street. Toward a dark sedan parked half a block down. Then back to the officers. For behavior. The first officer's voice sharpens. What behavior? Yours. The word cuts clean. The second officer frowns. What are you talking about? The man lowers his voice slightly. You approached without cause. You escalated without evidence. You labeled without verification. The first officer shakes his head. You think this is a courtroom? No. You think you're above investigation? No. Then open the bag. The man exhales once. Slow. Measured. Officer, he says evenly, if I open that bag, this entire interaction changes. Good, the first officer replies. Let's change it. The man studies his face carefully. You're sure? Open it? A pause. The crowd holds its breath. The man kneels slightly and unzips the leather bag slowly. Every officer leans forward instinctively. The body cam angle dips. Inside the bag, not a weapon, not gloves, not a mask. A sealed evidence folder. A small encrypted radio. A compact digital recorder. And a dark leather credential wallet. The first officer frowns. What is that? The man picks up the wallet slowly and flips it open. Gold shield? Federal insignia. Official seal. Special Agent Marcus Hale, he says calmly. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Silence detonates. Not loud, but total. The second officer blinks. The third officer steps back half a pace. The first officer doesn't move. That's not funny, he says. It's not a joke. You expect me to believe that? The man holds the credential steady. Call it in? The second officer immediately reaches for his radio. Dispatch, can you verify an FBI Special Agent Marcus Hale badge number? The man supplies it without hesitation. The seconds stretch. The crowd doesn't understand what's happening yet, but they feel the shift. The first officer's posture changes subtly. Less aggressive. More calculating. Dispatch crackles back. Unit on scene, confirmation received. Special Agent Marcus Hale assigned to Federal Financial Crimes Task Force. Undercover status active. The words land like gravity. Undercover. Active. The third officer steps fully back now. The second officer lowers his radio slowly. The first officer stares at the badge. Then at Hale. You're undercover? He asks quietly. Yes. For what? For surveillance connected to coordinated financial activity in this district. The officer's throat tightens. And you were sitting? Monitoring. The word is calm. Precise. You thought I was planning a robbery. The first officer says nothing. You built intent out of proximity. Silence. You escalated based on assumption. More silence. The crowd senses something has flipped. Phones remain raised. Whispers ripple. What happened? Who is he? The first officer finally speaks. You could have said something. Hale's gaze hardens slightly. You didn't give me room to... You refused to cooperate. I refused to surrender rights. You matched a pattern. Hale closes the credential wallet slowly. And you proved mine. The words hit harder than shouting. Because they're quiet. Measured. Documented. The second officer clears his throat. Sir, we weren't aware. That's the point, Hale replies calmly. You weren't aware. The first officer's authority has evaporated. Not violently, but completely. Because now the body cam isn't recording a suspect. It's recording an error, a misjudgment, a public exposure of profiling. And the real issue isn't the bag, or the bench, or the bank. It's certainty without cause, bias disguised as prevention, and power applied before proof. Hale looks directly at the first officer. You decided who I was before asking who I am. The first officer doesn't respond, because there is no response that fixes that. The crowd begins murmuring louder now. He's FBI? They thought he was robbing the bank. The second officer steps back fully. The third avoids eye contact. The first officer stands frozen in the center of the sidewalk. And for the first time since this started, he is no longer in control of the narrative. If you're enjoying this documentary so far, like and subscribe. Because what happens next doesn't just correct the mistake, it changes careers. The sidewalk doesn't return to normal. Not right away. The crowd doesn't disperse the moment the badge appears. If anything, more phones rise, more people stop. The financial district, built on quiet transactions and controlled movement, now hums with a different kind of tension. The first officer shifts his weight. For the first time since he stepped out of his cruiser, he looks unsure. Why weren't we notified? He asks, voice lower now. Marcus Hale slips the credential wallet back into his jacket calmly. Local departments aren't notified on every federal surveillance operation, he replies, especially when operational discretion matters. The second officer nods slightly. He understands that part. The first officer doesn't like it. You could have just said you were the federal. Hale's gaze stays steady. You approach me with an accusation, not a question. Silence. You framed me as a suspect before you framed me as a citizen. The words hit harder because they're factual. Measured. Not emotional. The third officer finally speaks. Sir, were we interfering with an active investigation? Hale glances briefly across the street again. That dark sedan. Still parked. Engine idling. Yes, he says plainly, you were. The weight of that answer spreads instantly. The second officer swallows. The first officer's jaw tightens. What investigation? He presses. Financial laundering tied to coordinated withdrawals and shell deposits, Hale replies. We've been tracking structured transactions through this branch for weeks. He gestures subtly toward the bank entrance. My position allowed clear line of sight to timed exchanges. I was waiting for confirmation. Confirmation of what? The second officer asks. That a courier was about to make a drop. The first officer glances toward the sedan now, following Hale's earlier gaze. And did that happen? Hale checks his watch calmly. It was scheduled for 7 minutes from now. A heavy pause. And now? The third officer asks. Hale looks at the patrol cars. The crowd. The cluster of uniforms. The attention. The courier likely saw the scene, he says evenly, and aborted. The silence that follows is suffocating. Because now this isn't about hurt feelings. Or embarrassment. It's about impact. You're saying we compromised your operation? The second officer asks carefully. Yes. The word is simple. Devastating. The first officer stiffens. You can't blame us for doing our job. Hale's eyes lock onto his. I can blame you for how you did it. No shouting. No raised voice. Just precision. You escalated without evidence. Hale continues. You used language that suggested bias. You created a public disturbance. And you compromised surveillance. The first officer's pride flares. You matched suspicious behavior. I matched your assumption. Another beat of silence. Sirens fade in the distance as backup units realize they aren't needed and idle awkwardly at the curb. Dispatch crackles faintly through someone's radio, unaware of the gravity of what just unfolded. The second officer clears his throat. Sir, what happens now? Hale doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he steps slightly aside and pulls out his phone. He dials. Waits. Supervisor, he says calmly. Yes, it's Hale. The operation at 7th and Grant has been compromised due to local interference. Yes, bodycam footage captured the interaction. The first officer's stomach drops slightly at that phrase. Bodycam footage. Captured. He had forgotten. Every word. Every phrase. Your type. Don't belong. Planning a robbery. All of it recorded. All of it time-stamped. Hale listens briefly on the call. Yes, he replies, I'll file a formal report. He ends the call. The air feels thinner now. The first officer tries to regain footing. So what, you're writing us up? I'm documenting what occurred, Hale replies. That's not fair, the first officer snaps quietly. We're trained to trust instinct. And you're trained to verify before you escalate. The third officer looks away. The second officer studies the pavement. The crowd begins to slowly disperse now, sensing the climax has passed. But not the consequences. Internal Affairs will review the body cam, Hale says calmly, as will federal oversight. The first officer's face tightens. You're going to ruin someone's career over a misunderstanding. Hale's expression doesn't change. It stopped being a misunderstanding when you decided I didn't belong. Silence. Traffic resumes its rhythm. Bank doors slide open and closed again. Business as usual. But not for everyone. Within days, the footage circulates through official channels. The phrases are flagged. The escalation timeline reviewed. Backup call timing analyzed. Operational interference documented. The Financial Crimes Task Force confirms the aborted courier never returned. A months-long investigation delayed. Internal Affairs opens a formal inquiry. Not about suspicion, but about conduct. About language. About profiling disguised as prevention. The first officer is placed on administrative leave pending review. Mandatory bias training becomes part of the department's policy update. Supervisors are required to complete renewed escalation protocols. Documentation standards are tightened. The second and third officers receive formal counseling for failure to de-escalate. The first officer faces a disciplinary board. And on a quiet Tuesday morning 3 weeks later, his badge is surrendered. Not dramatically, not in handcuffs, but permanently. Because the body cam didn't just record an encounter. It recorded certainty without cause. And certainty without cause becomes liability. Marcus Hale returns to the bench 2 months later. Different jacket. Different bag. Same posture. Same calm. The operation resumes. More discreetly this time. With coordination. With communication. He watches the bank doors again. But now, local patrol units drive past without stopping. Without assumption. Without narrative. Because somewhere in a precinct training room, new recruits are shown a clip. Not of a robbery. Not of a shootout. But of a man sitting on a bench. And an officer deciding who he was before asking. The lesson isn't about federal authority. It isn't about embarrassment. It's about restraint. Because prevention without proof becomes prejudice. And instinct without verification becomes error. Life moves on. The bank continues business. The sidewalk fills with pedestrians. And the bench remains exactly where it was. Bolted into public space. Open to anyone. Belonging to everyone. And this time, no one questions who gets to sit there. The end.
Looking through the viewfinder and crossing the threshold of the unknown, we uncover stories hidden in plain sight. Experience the profound moments of discovery that altered the course of human history.